Great. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Anne. At this point in the presentation, we will now be able to take questions for both of our presenters. Yeah, if you guys could join us on stage, that would be great. And just a reminder for those who are watching online, just click on your link on the screen and you can send in emailed questions to either of our presenters. But in the meantime, why don't we start with our live audience here, if anybody has questions for Anne or Holly. Yeah. And if you could just wait for someone to come with a mic so everyone online can benefit from your question.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. It's very promising. I have a few questions lingering in my mind about farmers markets and also community garden. So as I observed, or I did some field trip visits, most of the farm owners are white. And I was wondering if there's any African Americans who owns a farm. And this might be better they might be better in developing relationship with the African American community, thus increasing fresh fruits and vegetable consumptions among them. And also, is there any best practice guideline for plants growing for the community garden so that they don't need to start from scratch? You want to promote community garden, right? So it's going to be frustrating if they don't have any best practice guideline to refer to. And also, I'm also thinking, is there any regulations of the safety concerns of the farm stand? Because food and waterborne disease really taught us a lot about the contaminations of E. coli and pesticides and others. Thanks.
Okay, sounds like I think those all three were mine. Maybe I'll share one with you. I'm going to start with number 2 because that's a really quick, easy one. The second one you were mentioning was around community gardens. Is there a guide? Parks and People, which is a nonprofit in Baltimore City, has really been the lead on community gardens, and you should go to their website. It's a great resource. Also, the University of Maryland Extension just hired a sustainable ag specialist to really support community gardens and other growing experiences in the city. Going to your first question now on farmers markets. Going back to the farmer training program, what we have realized is we want to see, we have all this vacant land, and for the most part, the vacant land is in food deserts. A lot of it's in food deserts, and as our food desert map showed us, most of it is, are the residents are African American. And so our ideal is that we would be having African American residents, or any residents living in food deserts, would be the ones who'd be applying for this land to be able to grow food for themselves, and then also to be able to sell as well. In this request for qualifications of 10 farmers, I think we had 3 African American farmers who applied, but I really would like to see, our farmer training program being part of a housing authority and a part of really reaching out to the communities that are living in food deserts so that they are having, maybe this is one of their extra jobs to help grow food. So our goal is to make sure, or hope, that we can provide the resources so those people living in food deserts would be the ones who would have access to growing the food on the vacant land. Since this initiative is relatively new and we just did our first year for the request for qualifications, we knew that our first year coming out, how we wrote the qualifications, you had to have a year experience farming and you needed to have a business. And so we knew by those qualifications, because this is a business agreement with the city, this is not community garden, that we were going to most likely have farmers from the outside coming in. Outside meaning it could be Baltimore City, some other part of the city, or the county, or even another area. Like we did have one resident move from DC to Baltimore, now has bought a house and is now growing food in the city. So our goal is to diversify the farming community in Baltimore. And I think there was a third question on safety and regulations. And when I'm saying around zoning code is making it permissible to open a farm stand. And they still need to go with the health department for all related health codes. So that was a very zoning specific component.
Okay. Yeah, right in the back.
I talk really loud. I'm just wondering, do you have any information, or are you working at all on the idea of food co-ops and food buying clubs? It seems to be something that's gone past and maybe hopefully will come back around. If a lot of profit is being made from the SNAP benefits that are being given to private grocery stores, perhaps those profits could be turned back into the community with, food that's for people, not for profit.
Do you have much on that?
I've only read, I don't know much about what's going on. I think there is a food co-op there's a food co-op in Baltimore, still fairly expensive, not necessarily affordable, but I think a lot of the literature I've looked at has shown there hasn't been a lot of success in low-income neighborhoods and food co-ops. That's like 3 studies, so that's the only ones I've read.
Yeah, I've been watching it nationally right now. There's been more and more chatter and talk on that issue. I'm still waiting to see some successful models. I know that New York City was trying one. There's been some other ones. I want to see a good model come across. And when we see something that's really valuable, and they may be there. So if anyone online has any great models of food co-ops and food deserts, I would love to hear about it.
Okay. We do have a couple questions from our online audience. I'd like to get those in. One is asking whether there's been any consideration for the role for rooftop urban gardening as a commercial enterprise opportunity.
That's me. So rooftop gardening is really valuable in cities where there is no land. We're not one of those. We have land here for farming. In New York City, that is where you're seeing the farms, is on the rooftops. We are seeing some rooftop gardens, but I think that it all depends on expense. Is it more expensive or less expensive to be on a rooftop? So in Baltimore, where we do seem to have plenty of land for farming, we see more on the land than on the roofs. But it's not saying that there won't be some rooftop gardens. In our proposed land use zoning code, we did make rooftop gardening permissible, though, to encourage it.
Okay. And another one is noting that both the University of Maryland in Baltimore and Johns Hopkins on the East Baltimore campus are in or near food deserts. And wondering if either of you know whether there's been any attempt by either of those institutions to locate a large grocery store within walking distance of the campus.
I can speak about the University of Maryland piece. So Dr. Perman with University of Maryland is a part of the West Side Initiative, or I think the initiative's actually changed. Sorry, City University is called the initiative now, and it's a partnership between the city and University of Maryland around the whole West Side, where University of Maryland is housed, which is bordering in food deserts as well. And so within that initiative, one of the key strategies is to improve food access and food retail. It may or may not be bringing in a grocery store, but it's improving the food retail establishment along with the vitality and viability of the West Side.
And I think EBDI, which is connected to Hopkins and in the Hopkins area, has been looking at food retail and bringing more food retail to the area. I think there's still issues around what's considered affordable and would that help or not necessarily impact the community at all. I think I've heard people toss around like getting a Whole Foods or something else, and that probably wouldn't make a big difference if you're in a food desert and cost is an issue.
So I want to take one more stance on that question. That question was specifically about University of Maryland and Johns Hopkins excuse me. But I do want to talk very quickly about Baltimore's approach to food deserts as far as a retail approach. So we have just approved a food desert retail strategy in Baltimore City. We looked at the model from New York City called New York City Fresh and are doing a similar model. Those details in New York City doesn't apply to Baltimore, but the concept was a really good concept. And so the main concept with it, how to attract grocery stores in food deserts, which is really what I hear that question's really getting at, is what we're looking at is financial incentives, obviously, but there's not that much money on the table. So it's just working with our existing financial incentives and tax credits we have, how to package them. But what we're doing that's innovative is we have 11 government agencies that has something to do with the development of grocery stores in Baltimore. And we have asked each agency to contribute 1 to 3 services that they can do in kind to help reduce the financial grocery gap for grocery stores. So when we take those 11 agencies' contributions plus the tax credits and tax incentives, we're hoping that we will then have a financial package that would be substantial enough to attract grocery stores into food deserts. And this kind of ties into the Public Health for America. So I think I'm getting my acronym wrong. But it's the nonprofit that's working with grocery stores around the country who are committing to locating food retailers in food deserts. And so we're really wanting to see those stores that are already committing into food deserts to commit to Baltimore, and also for other stores that may be in Baltimore who need some financial incentives or support to looking at food deserts.
Okay. I believe we had some more questions right in the front here.
I have a question, one for each of you. So for Anne, you mentioned that small stores had higher prices because they don't buy in as much bulk as larger stores. But have you seen any difference in prices in chain stores that are in different neighborhoods?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I have not seen an instance where that has happened, but that would be something that would be very interesting to look at. And the reason I'd say that there probably isn't a great difference is because typically the circular, which is the promotional, the sales every week that go out through the newspaper, they're not going to change that for different neighborhoods because they print one circular and that goes out to everybody. But if not in chains, that's I don't think so, but I could be wrong about that.
You said that 24.5% of people in food deserts were on SNAP, using SNAP benefits. You said you weren't sure why, but do you have any idea? Do you think it's the qualifying income or just knowledge of the program?
Just recently, the mayor signed a memorandum of agreement for the Baltimore Partnership to End Childhood Hunger, and one of the goals is to increase our participation rate in SNAP benefits and also WIC. And so when we looked at those numbers for Baltimore City and also the state, our SNAP numbers were looking relatively strong for at least those with families. And so what my analysis, which I need to be doing, is looking at, I think our SNAP numbers may be higher in other areas in the city, but not necessarily in food deserts. And once we start to delve into that, we'll figure out, so the question that you're really asking is why is that number low? And also I want to look at, is that number low? I want to compare it to other food deserts and see, is that consistent to other food deserts? It's a really new finding for us. We just figured it out around 2 weeks ago. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Holly and Ann. Thank you very much. A lot of talks I go to, I leave deflated, but this one I think I'll leave feeling motivated that there's policy change being enacted, so thank you. I have a question, though, about energy balance, and energy balance is certainly the most proximal to overweight and obesity when we're talking about a public health problem. And so I hear a lot of promotion towards healthful foods and food access and food availability, but I guess my question is maybe larger or maybe next steps or looking and thinking about the private sector and the vast availability and access of unhealthful foods and unhealthy foods and how you think we can combat that or whether we should or because I didn't hear that at all in the presentation and just wonder if you have any ideas.
Giving that one to me. That I think is, obviously there are, we live in a capitalist country and it's all about making profits. And it is not, we don't take kindly to regulating in the way I think we would need to regulate if we were considering, we just have way too many calories out there. We have way too much food out there. We have way too much unhealthy food. If you just looked at dose response from that perspective and said, how many times do you encounter food in a given day and how many times, is it a healthy food choice? It's, and that's a huge part of it. And in some ways, I tend to not talk about obesity because I feel like we're obsessed with obesity and that becomes the indicator that everybody's looking towards. I feel like we have to step back because there's so many steps before that we have got to reacquaint ourselves with food. We have got to just, there's really big system changes that need to happen for people to want to make different choices when they're eating. And those system changes have to be in place. So I like to look at it like this is a systems approach. Obesity is a symptom of what I call a dysfunctional food system. And of a dysfunctional food system. And it's the one we see, most, often probably in our work. And that, back that up and keep thinking about what is creating that, then it becomes a much more complicated problem than just energy in, energy out. I mean, ultimately, that's what you want to measure, but I think we really have to look at how are we going to change our relationship to food, and how do we start to do that from a policy perspective with some of the policies Holly's talking about at a city level, at a state level, and at a federal level. And what I think you find is the most interesting work going on around the country is really at the city level, because we have a lot more leverage. And you'll see people like Holly and people in those similar positions that are trying to figure out what's going to how do you shift these things around and change the equation so, somehow, we don't have this be just one more disparity that we're seeing. And, we're seeing obesity in all income groups. It's growing significantly in middle and upper income as well. I think what you see is just the lack of access and the disparity between, what you can do about it, affordability and things like that. So I don't think that answered your question, but I think it's, I don't know if I have the answer to that question.
We do have an online question. It's a little bit of a follow-up to that, and it's a congratulations to Holly's office for all the great work that you've been doing. But a question about how much staff you have, or whether most of your work is done via partnerships.
So the answer is both. So it started off with my position. It was really grant funded in the beginning, seed funding from 4 foundations. I had a consulting firm prior to this, and I was actually on maternity leave when I took the position, and so 10 hours a week was great. And so then at 10 hours a week, I was like, wait, this is too much work for 10 hours a week. We need to secure some more grant funds. And so eventually I came up to full-time, and the community foundations were fantastic in supporting these efforts. Then the city actually decided to make my city a full-time permanent position in city government. And so when we went into city council to ask for the position to be a full-time city permanent position, the community foundations once again stepped up to the plate and said, okay, we're going to match you double plus your salary, so that when you go into really asking for this position, you're going to have some money to be able to hire staff and to really be able to make an impact. So that was like a great windfall. So I came out as city employee and had 1 full-time staff plus an operating budget, which was night and day compared to what I was doing prior to that. Since then, we've raised more grant funds. Now I have 2 full-time staff plus myself. But as you know, that is not enough. We do a lot of work, and we do the work because of Food Pack. And with the 35 organizations, it's an army. We have an army in the city who's working on food access issues. And then really the leadership of the mayor, most of the agencies in Baltimore City are supporting these efforts in so many different capacities as well.
Great. I thought I saw some hands way in the back over there.
This is another unanswerable question, so maybe you should just call it a comment instead, and I'd like a reaction to the comment. You were talking about earlier, Holly, about how SNAP benefits, they actually help retailers because the money ends up in their pockets too. But I was reading this morning actually that 75% of the people who get SNAP are employed actually. So not only is it a benefit to or subsidy to retailers, but also to a lot of employers who aren't paying a living wage. So I guess if you turn this into a question, I'm just curious if that's part of the conversation, the idea of a living wage, and how, when you talk about affordability, there's 2 sides to it. One is what is the price, and the other side is what is the person's purchasing power, and of course that is driven mostly by what their income is. So I just wonder if that comes up in the conversation, say with your food pack or any of that.
So I'm actually really glad you raised that comment just now, because your figure you just mentioned is actually consistent to our figure, because we said 82% of the residents living in food deserts are employed. So that's consistent. Now I know my SNAP number is a little lower in the food deserts, but the fact that there's such a high employment rate, which is why we really need to have a food desert retail strategy, because it's about job growth along with food access. It can't just be one or the other. And so when we're talking about job growth, yes, with the grocery stores and developing grocery stores, you see your construction jobs, which has a certain wage associated to it. And then in the grocery stores, there's also another wage associated to that as well, whether it's full-time, part-time, whether it's manager or clerk and so forth. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity for job growth in the food sector. I want to use Boston as a quick example. Boston has had this transformation of food trucks. But what was interesting with the food truck culture in Boston was that it created over 200 jobs, new jobs through food trucks. Whether it's a food entrepreneur who developed their own business concept, they were probably highly educated and had the skills to and the business plans, but then they hired a whole bunch of staff to help them with their food trucks. And I think that there's many ways that we could be looking at food sector jobs and hopefully start to change that price point, because they notoriously seem to be a little lower than we would like to see them be. But since food seems to be, we all eat a lot of it, as we know, it sure would be nice that people could actually make money off of food as well.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Chris. I'm with Streetwise Foundation. We're based in Washington, D.C., and I'd like to share a quick anecdote. Okay, we do a lot of youth outreach programming, and one of our programs that we do is nutrition, and did a great program with a bunch of 13, 14-year-olds. And 2 days later, a parent comes into, and she's very upset, okay, and we're like, whoa, what's going on? So she's like, well, I don't appreciate what you told my child and all this type of stuff. And, of course, I'm the executive director, so I'm thinking that there was an issue. But turns to find out is that parent had an issue because, of course, we did our programming. And when she went grocery shopping and she brought home the groceries for the child said, I'm not going to eat any of this because it's unhealthy. Okay? So I was like, why are you upset? This is great. I understand the fact that, you wasted, X amount of money on food that the child's not going to, engage in, but, you should feel proud. But what the conversation turned into was that the parent, obviously overweight, was using the child as an excuse to engage in that type of food and that type of behavior, okay? And that was like the staring into the abyss, so to speak, because not only is it the fact that, we provide not only great programming, great food, great all these different opportunities, but at the end of the day, it's a lifestyle situation, and that a lot of people aren't ready necessarily to engage in that or come to grips with their own inner dark secrets, so to speak. So, and I think that's one of the things that it's kind of like a top-up type approach, because we can provide all these great things, but at the end of the day, if they don't want them, or if they're not ready to expand their horizon, so to speak. And the reason why I say this is because I know in D.C. There's a growing Muslim population, and they're located in a lot of these food deserts that we have in Washington. And what has happened is that because of the lifestyle has changed in a lot of these neighborhoods, a lot of the food desert convenience stores, Chinese food restaurants, fast food restaurants have changed, because that is what the community wants. So what's happening is that now they're starting to do halal, which is like, I guess, the Muslim, kosher type situation. So I see it that the neighborhood can change, what is being offered as far as food. And definitely with the food truck situation, we have that great in D.C. But from our perspective, as far as service providers and things like that, from your perspective, how do we start to engage in the actual, the lifestyle change that has to happen? And what's your thoughts on that?
I've heard a very similar story from a woman we work with, Antonia Demas, who does a Food for Life. Food is Elementary program with kids, and a parent called up and said a similar thing. Is now, and her issue was she couldn't afford the healthy foods, and they were creating demand for this food, and she didn't want it. And it was like it just pained her to know, that she couldn't provide for her child what she wanted. And I think that the behavior change part of that is it is a slow-moving train, and that the more, just as we have been exposed to so many unhealthy foods, the more exposures, the more opportunities, the more chances you have of incorporating parents into the programming, having community dinners for them. That's part of the Foods Elementary program. And really recognizing that we may never get people to make a lot of the changes that they know are the best changes for them. That's a tough nut to crack. And I think about Jeffrey Canada's work in the Harlem Children's Zone, and he works with the parents of the kids, but he has basically said, I cannot afford to go and try and start with and he doesn't say I'm not going to do anything about their parents, but basically I can't afford to put my resources into the parents. I have got to just work with the kids. And so, as much as parents, kids can be gateway, their behaviors can be gateways to the family, vice versa, the parents' behaviors are also gateways. But I think, I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think it is just a this continuous idea of you've got to have, multiple ways of interacting and influencing and getting them to participate in, and maybe it's gardening at home, maybe it's something else where they start to recognize that there's some things that they may be able to do and make it really simple. We start with very simple things in a lot of our programs, recognizing that people aren't going to make big changes overnight, and that part of it is just this slow process. No funder wants to hear that. Everybody wants to hear that, oh, so you're going to stop obesity? Oh, sure, I'm going to stop obesity in 3 years. We're going to be able to, hello. How long did it take us to get here? And there's got to be a recognition that there's a whole system in place that works against us making good food choices every single day. Every time you walk out, you don't have to walk out your front door. Look in my cupboards. My God, there's all, look in your own, that there's just all these opportunities, and that is not going to change overnight. So.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think that wraps up our presentation for today. Again, I just want to give a really big hand to Ann Palmer and Holly Firstep for a wonderful presentation. And thank you all, and I hope we'll see you next month for our next presentation on reducing asthma disparities in children. Thank you.